People often talk about transformation as if it's a function of intensity. The stronger the experience, the more dramatic the release, the more permanent the change is expected to be. That expectation creates a lot of confusion because if intensity were the determining factor, people would change their lives after crises, arguments, or moments of emotional overwhelm. Sometimes they do. Often they don't. What I see over and over is that lasting change doesn't correlate cleanly with how powerful an experience feels in the moment. It correlates with something quieter: timing, readiness, consent at a level most people don't consciously track. This becomes very obvious when you work with people in altered or expanded states of awareness. Two people can go through experiences that look almost identical from the outside. Similar imagery, similar insights, similar emotional tone. One person walks away reorganized. The other feels moved, inspired, and essentially unchanged a few weeks later. The difference isn't willpower. It isn't intelligence. It isn't sincerity. It's whether the system is prepared to live differently once the information arrives. Most people assume insight creates readiness. In practice, readiness often precedes insight. When someone is ready, insight lands without weight. It rearranges priorities without effort. It clarifies decisions that previously felt complex. When someone isn't ready, insight becomes content, something to think about, something to reference. This isn't a flaw. It's how systems protect themselves from destabilizing change. Readiness develops when a person has exhausted the utility of their current identity configuration. That exhaustion doesn't always feel dramatic. It can feel like boredom, like repetition, like competence without engagement. People often reach this point long before they admit it to themselves. They keep improving a structure that no longer needs improvement. They keep refining language that already works. They keep solving problems that aren't really the issue. Eventually, the system stops responding the way it used to. Effort produces less return. Motivation fluctuates. Old rewards stop reinforcing behavior. That's usually when someone starts seeking experiences that promise depth. Not because they want intensity, but they sense something underneath their current life that hasn't been accessed yet. This is where sessions can become pivotal. Not because of what happens during them, but because of what the system is already prepared to relinquish. When someone enters a session ready, they're not looking to add something. They're unconsciously prepared to release something. Often they don't know what that is yet. It might be a role they've outgrown, a self-concept that once kept them safe, an internal contract that says, this is as far as I go. When that contract loosens, information that was always present suddenly becomes actionable. People describe this as remembering something important. Not a fact, a truth about themselves that reorganizes their sense of permission. Afterward, they don't usually say, that session changed everything. They say things like, I stopped arguing with myself. Or, certain decisions became obvious. Or, I couldn't go back to how I was seeing this before. That's how you know change has occurred at the identity level. There's less internal negotiation, less self-management, less need to convince. Life simplifies, even if circumstances stay complex. Sessions that don't produce this effect aren't failures. They're context setting. They give language. They give imagery. They give orientation. They prepare the ground. People often undervalue this because it doesn't come with immediate movement. But preparation matters. A system that isn't prepared will translate insight into meaning rather than behavior. Meaning feels satisfying. Behavior changes life. Readiness bridges that gap. It's also why timing matters more than frequency. Repeated experiences without readiness tend to stack conceptually. They create a sense of familiarity with depth without requiring reorganization. That can feel reassuring. It can also delay change. When readiness is present, a single experience can catalyze movement that continues unfolding for months or years. Not because the experience was special, because the system was done maintaining what came before it. This is where a lot of misunderstanding arises around facilitation. People assume the facilitator's job is to produce insight. Insight is rarely the issue. The real work is containment. Containment means holding a space where the system can reorganize without being rushed, directed, or impressed with itself. When containment is present, the person's own readiness does the work. The facilitator doesn't need to push. They don't need to interpret aggressively. They don't need to create drama. They need to stay oriented while the person's internal structure shifts. This is subtle work. It doesn't always look productive from the outside. There may be long pauses. There may be quiet realizations rather than emotional release. Those moments are often where the deepest changes occur. People sometimes feel underwhelmed immediately afterward. They expect fireworks. They get clarity. Then, over time, they notice that certain choices no longer feel available. Old patterns lose appeal. Energy reallocates on its own. That's readiness expressing itself through behavior. My name's Nemo, and I help people like you access past lives and contact their higher self in 3 hours or less. I include that here because people who seek out that work are often already in a state of readiness they don't fully recognize yet. They're not looking for proof. They're not looking to be convinced. They've noticed that something in them is prepared to live differently, even if they don't yet know how. The session doesn't create that readiness, it reveals it. When the timing is right, the information that comes through doesn't need reinforcement. It integrates on its own. People stop asking whether it was real. They start noticing how their behavior has changed. They show up differently in conversations. They make decisions with less friction. They stop seeking confirmation for things they already know. That's when sessions change everything. Not because they add something extraordinary, because they remove what was already complete. If you're considering this kind of work, or any deep work, it's worth paying attention to where you are internally. Are you seeking movement because you're curious? Or because something in you is done holding the current structure together? Those are very different starting points. Curiosity leads to exploration. Completion leads to change. Both have value. They just produce different outcomes. There's nothing wrong with exploration. It expands perspective. Change requires a different kind of consent. That consent can't be forced. It can't be talked into existence. It arrives when the cost of staying the same quietly outweighs the uncertainty of moving forward. When that happens, experiences that once felt interesting become decisive. Not because they're stronger, because they land where there's room for them. If you're here, listening to this, notice what resonates without trying to interpret it too quickly. Notice whether you're gathering information or preparing to release something. There's no need to rush that distinction. Your system already knows where it is. Let it lead.